as 3 US cents can actually purchase fuel. So they're actually able to buy fuel and cook money. How have we been able to do this? We've been able to do this by using existing infrastructure. So we've partnered with Vivo. We said, why not work with someone who already has an existing infrastructure that can actually deliver fuel, liquid fuel. And that is how we are able to get the ethanol from where we purchase right into the Shell petrol stations, and then we're able to transfer using smart micro tankers to the cocoa ATMs, and the consumers are able to come, dock their canisters, refuel, and go and cook using ethanol.
Thank you, Sophie. Could you tell me about carbon financing? How does Cocoa incorporate that in its business model, and how does that influence your growth?
Okay. Thank you, Jean-Louis. First, to address one of the questions you raised was, how do consumers feel about us? I have to say consumers love us. We commercially launched in 2019. To date, we are in 462,000 households in 2 years. So that speaks to how well our solution is being received and how well it addresses the issues that customers are facing. Turning to carbon financing, when you look at the affordability of our solution, the only way we would make our clean solution affordable is through carbon. We subsidize both the cooker and the ethanol, and that is how we are then able to pass those costs through to the consumer by giving them an affordable solution. If that is in any way interfered with, obviously it interferes with our ability to scale. We are scaling very rapidly. We are adding 1,500 customers a day. So we are very worried of what government will do post-COP26 in terms of how will they look at carbon as a source of revenue. But in the interim, that is what we are using to make sure that we add more and more consumers every day.
Thank you, Sophie. Claudia, moving to you. So tell us about Biomaster's business model, and tell us also what a pellet company using a tool and fuel model needs to get right to be successful.
All right, thank you. So we provide a Tier 4 stove to our customers, along with wood pellets produced in Rwanda as fuel. And we do this by charging the customers not for the stove, but also for the fuel. The stove cost is factored into the fuel, and customers just need to buy a minimum quantity of pellets every month. And this is so popular with customers and makes it so affordable because there's no upfront cost at all to the customer, and they save from day one. In terms of getting it right, pellet cooking has come a very long way in the last few years. Pellet manufacturing, is a very mature industry in Europe and North America, where it's mainly used for grid electricity and home heating. But actually the stoves for cooking over the last few years have developed now to a level in terms of cleanliness and convenience that really excites customers. So in order to get it right, we believe that we need to offer a great product that people really want. We need to get the price right, and we need to focus on customer training by the time or at the time of sign up. So that's really important, to have a clear customer focus and put all your efforts into customer centricity. And then, of course, couple that with a lean organization and eliminate waste in your processes, and then you get it right.
Thank you. So your business tries to replace charcoal with pellets. It's still biomass. Mm-hmm. Why is that preferable? Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, and that's a really valid point. But if you look at the high efficiency of pellets, it's really not comparable to charcoal. You need between 6 to 9 kilos of wood to have 1 kilo of charcoal, whereas with pellets you need 1.3 kilos of wood to make 1 kilo of pellets. So you actually only use a little bit of water in your production process, but you press the wood as it is. And then couple that with a stove that is highly efficient at 47 and more percent efficiency, and you end up with a much lower cost of cooking energy per unit of cooking energy. So actually this makes a lot of sense. Wood is a local resource. We work with what we have in Rwanda, and especially in a landlocked country like Rwanda, this makes a lot of sense. And also the stove, the way it's designed, it lends itself to the traditional dishes in the area. Like it cooks for a long time, it gets really, really hot. So customers actually really like the convenience of it and like working with it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, every cooking method has its place in the market, and we need a market-based approach. But we really believe that pellet cooking has a lot going for itself because it's so efficient. We work with what we have, and we can scale quickly by only rolling out a stove, and we don't need cylinders.
You mentioned customer centricity. Can you tell me a little more what that means for Biomasters and why it's important?
So for us, customer centricity means you really listen to the needs and the expectations of customers. And our business model is all centered around repeat interaction every month through the pellet sales with our customers. So we need to get it right, we need to listen to them, and we need to make sure that we get consistent usage. So we do that by providing free of charge repairs. We have a warranty. We offer delivery for customers. So we do listen, and we get constant feedback of pellet quality, stove performance, and anything else that is right or isn't right.
Thank you. Sophie, one more question for you. So how do you see the enabling environment for cocoa networks, and what do you do about it if you see challenges there?
Thank you, Jean-Louis. So far, if I'm to speak specifically about Kenya, we are facing challenges in the sense that we would want the government to remove toll gate taxes. And when I talk about toll gate taxes, we're talking about VAT, value-added tax. We have that imposed at 16% on our cooker. We produce our cookers in India, which means we incur an import duty of 25%. Coming to the ethanol side, there is VAT that has been removed for a 1-year period, but we also incur import duty of 25% because there's not enough denatured ethanol within the East African Community region to meet our demand. So we are constantly engaging with the government to ask them to remove these toll gate taxes because it is critical when a company is in its young stages to be given an environment where it's possible for you to scale. When we look at the positives of our solution, they address a lot of the issues that government is talking about, respiratory ailments from using dirty cooking fuel. It's affordable, it's reducing climate emissions. The positives outweigh any potential negatives. So we are constantly in conversation with the government to continuously review this policy environment. We are looking forward to positive outcome within the conversations this year. But coming to Rwanda government was able to extend to us exemptions from all duties, all VAT across both our hardware and software. And we've signed a multi-year agreement, and that is what we are seeking to sign with other governments. So as we talk with Kenya, we are using the Rwanda as an example, and as we talk to other governments as well, that is serving as the benchmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you both very much for that stimulating conversation. Key elements there really around getting the enabling environment right. And then that customer centricity, I hadn't heard that framing before. That's what I was saying around the locals. So thank you, Claudia and Sophie, very much. So now to our last conversation on industry trends and outlook. We're joined by Peter George, who's the co-investment director of Spark Plus Africa Fund. And great! I think we're going to do a little dance on the panel and. Thank you so much. And we're also delighted to have with us Tariye Gabadegisin, who's the Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer of ARM Harith. Welcome. Thank you.
So, Peter, the first question for you. So, the Clean Cooking Alliance and Enabling Capital, with the key and important support of the African Development Bank as a key funder, launched recently Spark Plus Africa Fund. So why is this the right time to launch a clean cooking fund? Why not 5 or 10 years ago? What's different? What's new?
Thanks, Jean-Louis. It's a pleasure to be here. So just to start off, Spark Plus is a $70 million commercial and impact investment fund. focused on the clean cooking sector. We're making $1 to $7 million investments across the value chains of different technologies, including LPG, biomass pellets, and other cooking solutions. As Jean-Louis said, our investors include African Development Bank, as well as a number of other DFIs, the Danish Development Bank, IFU, the Belgian Development Bank, BIO, as well as pension funds, family offices, and foundations. To answer your question, Jean-Louis, I think now is the right time because we're in kind of a sweet spot. Business cases are starting to be demonstrated at scale, but there's a real need for a specialized investment fund for several reasons. I think first, we aggregate small transactions, something that DFIs directly find it difficult, a reason why they find it difficult to engage in investments in this sector, just due to size. Secondly, we de-risk commercial investors through a blended fund structure with catalytic first loss capital. So we essentially provide, through the structure of our fund, de-risking for more commercial investors. And thirdly, we help institutional investors make sense of a complex landscape of early stage companies in frontier markets. So going back to my original point, the fact that business cases are starting to come together, I think that's obviously the most important driver for why this is the right time. And we see three broad areas where there are sort of self-reinforcing determinants for success. On the supply side, mobile money and IoT technology, bundling with other solutions, that's all improving affordability, it's increasing average revenue per customer, and it's improving business cases. On the demand side, consumer demographics are shifting. And then the third leg of the stool is the public sector. And we see momentum on climate, increasingly progressive policies, Rwanda being a great example of infrastructure and economic development policies that are benefiting the sector. So I think we're really optimistic that now is the right time. And I know I'm out of time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. Tariye, what growth opportunities do you see in the sector?
Thank you, and I beg your pardon for joining a bit late. Just to give some context, I run a private equity infrastructure fund, and so we're trying to allocate private capital into the energy efficiency, clean cooking, and sort of areas such as this. And I think what's an important point that I want to make here is that it's important for us to be able to scale capital to solve for the clean cooking challenge, and that we need to move away from the specialization, the fringe aspect of clean cooking, and it must become central. The same way that power and the sort of transformation of the energy sector in Africa was central to development policy, clean cooking needs to be central to development policy. And for too long, it's really been something that, it's great to see such a large interest in it, but to be able to get more capital to go to this space, there are a few things that are crucial. You need a policy environment where there is really a focus by the government on delivering on the space. Now, one of the areas we see a great opportunity for clean cooking is in urbanization. There is rapid urbanization in Africa. It is considered that I think half of Africa's population is going to be urban. And a lot of clean cooking challenges come from biomass cooking in urban areas. And so one of the direct ways to tackle a clean cooking challenge is by solving for clean cooking in urban areas, and LPG presents a very compelling solution and is compelling from the private sector's perspective as well. But there needs to be a coherent policy to drive capital into that space by saying that that is supported by the government, that infrastructure is in place, and that it is really a mission from the government. But how do we solve for rural-based solutions? How do you get clean cooking into the more distributed, in the far-flung areas, last mile? LPG might not be the solution, but we need to have a framework for that as well. And so we think there are some opportunities there, but being able to scale capital in a way that's compelling for private capital is also going to be crucial.
Thank you. Peter, as an investor, what challenges do you see in the market, and is there anything that governments should do about it?
Sure. I think I'm going to be a bit politically incorrect and say that I think to the extent that development partners and governments want to stimulate private sector investment, I think they have to really recognize and internalize private sector incentives. And this goes to the point that Taria just made around, the fact that LPG will not be the right solution everywhere, but the development sector has often focused on incentivizing companies to go into the most difficult to serve, the least profitable kind of markets, and expected that to sort of lead to tremendous investment and private sector activity. And that's just not how it works. I think what happens is that commercially oriented players ignore the distractions of where the government funding or the development funding may be allocated for, and they go on about their business. And the companies that really chase after that funding don't actually develop to scale and don't create the impact that the donors were intending to create with their funding to begin with. So I think it's, of course, important, and we heard this morning about leaving no one behind. I think that's incredibly important. But when companies don't achieve scale and profitability first, there's limited impact. I think that there needs to be recognition within governments, within development partners, donors, that the private sector relies on investment to create efficiencies, to create scale, to drive down costs, and in turn to make solutions more affordable to more people over time. That's just the way that companies operate, and everything that governments and donors do should really recognize that path. I think the second point, and I'll make this one very quickly, is that there's a lot of nuance and complexity in the sector. We're a specialized investor, and we still find it challenging to navigate the different impact cases of different technologies, the scalability of different business models, the policy environments that are critical for different fuel types to be viable. And so interventions that really make the space more transparent, more straightforward, and I think that comes with companies that are operating at scale. That's really what will help the sector progress.
Thank you, Peter. Taria, so the Clean Cooking Alliance's industry snapshot surveys in the past few years have found a lot of growth in investments in clean cooking, actually tripling between 2014 and 2020. What we've also seen is a concentration of capital into fewer and fewer companies. So in 2020, 7 companies took 90% of the capital. So is that a good sign for the sector?
Well, I think the base for that data is going to be important, because if you're growing at a significant rate from a very low base, it's still a low base, and it's still not enough growth. And so I think the sector is still in dire need of capital. And though there's been progress with the amount of capital that's been allocated based on a lot of the new companies, and especially tech enablement has also supported a lot more capital allocation, but we haven't seen truly scaled models. And I think by having a few companies that are taking more and more of the capital, it speaks to their ability to make for a growth case, but it doesn't imply they've achieved the growth, because we're not seeing that impact. So even though these are positive signs, we need to judge our success by the amount of people that have been reached. And we still have billions of people who do not have a clean cooking solution. We still have a lot of these people in both urban, developed areas in Africa, for example, where I'm from, in cities, as well as very inefficient ways of cooking in rural areas. So I think we need to judge success by that. Fortunately, technology presents a great opportunity for us, and innovation does present a great opportunity for us. But I think that the parties that are able to attract that capital, the number is still too small. And really, we want to be able to see the type of transformation that we saw in some of the other sectors that we've seen in the market that were filling significant needs. And I just want to add here that clean cooking is often thought of as a gender issue as well, because it disproportionately affects women. And if you don't have more women allocating capital, more women making decisions about policies that affect clean cooking, we will not see the transformation that we need, and the 7 companies are not enough.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Peter.
Right, and thank you to Jean-Louis very much. So it's great we've got a packed room here in Kigali. We've got a couple of mics out on the floor, so we've got a few minutes now for any questions for our distinguished panelists. I can see a lady on the left side over there. If you could please direct your question to one of the panelists. We'll take a couple and then go back to the panelists. Thank you. And then the gentleman here in the front.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Judith Joan Walker from African Clean Energy. In light of recent events, even in Western Europe, there's worries about energy security and also food security. I just wanted to ask a question. I know that Jerome made a very good point actually about Nigeria should be processing and retaining their own gas resources. Most of the markets that we are dealing with in terms of energy access do not have fossil fuels as a resource. Perhaps Jerome or Martin, but you could speak to the economic and energy security risks of basically getting a large portion of your population suddenly reliant on an imported energy source.
Thank you very much. And can we take the second question from the gentleman at the front now, please?
Thank you. My question is directed to the two capital investors. Peter can probably anticipate what my question is. And the last speaker spoke about in urban situations, people are still cooking with poor solutions. Electricity, nobody has said that on the panel. Are the capital investors looking at investing into supply chains for energy efficient electrical appliances? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So who would like to take the first question?
Thank you very much for the question with regards to energy security. Of course, the recent events in Ukraine and blacklisting of Russian energy supplies has shocked most of the world. But you can see the impact on Africa has been very, very limited. Africa has never relied on Russian LPG. Most of the LPG coming into Africa have been coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Most of them are American shale originated LPG. And the tragedy, as I said, is that Nigeria is exporting an unbelievably large amount of its own LPG. So if Nigeria would take half of its production and then give 1 million tons of LPG to other African sources of demand, then you could have a more reasonable distribution for both demand and supply for that particular resource.
Thank you very much. And the second question, perhaps?
Sure, I'm happy to treat that because I'm tackling that every day as well, trying to figure out the role for electricity-based clean cooking, being that we've also been investing in the off-grid space and trying to think about off-grid in more rural areas, to what extent you could include electricity-based clean cooking as part of the offering. So it's very important that the offering is fit for purpose, urban versus rural, but also the country. So countries that are energy deficient like Nigeria, there isn't even electricity for just basic consumption of sort of more than 4 hours a day. So electricity is not a viable solution in the near term. However, in other countries that have more of a supply surplus, and which does happen. I mean, there are countries in West Africa and countries in East Africa that have a supply surplus. The issue is really more a case of cost. And to what extent is the cost of an electricity-based cooking solution comparable to some of the other solutions? And until you can have a cost framework and that there is actually innovation in respect of electricity-based cooking that would be cost compliant or cost competitive with some of the alternatives, it is really a challenge. Just in the off-grid space, as we've been looking at ways to use electricity, I think there's an opportunity to tie it to productive use, for one example. So to the extent that you're actually able to earn income off an electricity-based solution versus just using it for household, I think that's a very important area to consider. And then carbon credits. So to the extent that in rural areas there's an off-grid solution with carbon credits that can therefore make the power more affordable, could an electricity-based clean cooking solution be integrated? But it has to be fit for purpose.
Thank you so much. And I believe there was...
Oh, maybe I'll just add one.
Please.
One short point to add to Ria's response to Simon's question. We don't invest in solutions. We invest in companies. And electric cooking is perfectly within scope for us. We really want to invest in companies that are doing electric cooking, but it relies on companies coming to us with a business case. We're not a seed investor, so we need a company that is coming with, that is post-revenue, that is at a certain stage of development. But we are very interested in investing in electric cooking. It's just that we need companies that have worked out how that business model sort of works.
Thank you very much. I can see a huge show of hands. I think I can take one more. Am I right? One more question? Can we take from the gentleman at the front here? Just if you could be 30 seconds or less, just to help us.
Thank you very much. Very brief and very direct. It's especially for the Rwandan experience. I'm Nauraj Dakal from Alternative Energy Promotion Center in Nepal. For the pellet cook stove, we have a little different experience in Nepal. For the households who normally don't buy fuel in a big quantity, they don't prefer it. They rather prefer the regular biomass into cook stove. So how are you targeting your customers for the pellet stoves? I mean, whether there is a particular segment, for example, in our case, hotels or restaurants or enterprises who buy fuel in a bigger quantity.
So thank you. How are you targeting customers? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. We're actually very clear in who we target and what we want to achieve. Our main goal is to replace charcoal cooking in urban areas. So since we are still a startup, we're still a young company, we're trying to get cash positive and profitable as quickly as possible. And that means for us that we first have to serve the urban cash-paying customers. We cannot yet afford to provide a solution to the rural households that don't currently pay for their usage. If I may just add one sentence in terms of reducing emissions. When we look at population growth predicted until the end of the century, most of this, 80% of this, is going to be in Africa, and most of it in East Africa. And 90% of these people use either charcoal or firewood. So we really need to find a solution that means they are really consistently every day changing their cooking habits and they're switching to a clean alternative. And that needs a business model that actually relies on counting emissions in terms of fuel usage and not just in terms of number of stoves distributed. So we really, I think, in the industry have to shift, and we see this more and more, to business models that rely on providing the fuel as well as the tool and making sure people really consistently switch their cooking habits.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Extremely difficult to summarize in 30 seconds the richness of the conversation we've just had. The scale of the challenge ahead of us is, of course, daunting. It is, of course, huge, but we've heard some terrific examples of innovations and some pathways towards scaling. Already, of course, the gender point is of huge importance that we've heard. If we don't meet our targets towards 2030, the gendered impacts of those, we need to be hugely mindful of. And let's heed the call to this gathering around be bold, because now it is clearly more needed than ever. So thank you so much for such a fabulous conversation. Thank you.
Yes, if we may have another warm round of applause for our speakers. As we quickly conclude this session, I'd just like to highlight that this session was organized by the Clean Cooking Alliance, an organization that's working hard day and night to develop a sustainable clean cooking industry. So thank you, Mr. Jean-Louis and your team for all that you do. And thank you to our speakers. We're going to take a 15-minute break before we get into our next session, which will be leveraging the water, energy, food nexus in the Sahel. So if you're interested, don't go too far. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Let's see you. Just to catch up.